Along the banks of the Volga River in the summer of 922, an Arab envoy observed a scene that would echo through history for centuries. Ahmad ibn Fadlan found himself standing among a band of Rus Vikings as they prepared the funeral of their chieftain. At the heart of the ritual was a young enslaved woman who had consented to accompany her master in death. What unfolded was not a quiet act of devotion, but a deliberate progression of violence, one that erased the boundary between sacred obligation and brutal display. Ibn Fadlan's record remains the sole eyewitness account of this particular Viking funeral custom. Though scholars continue to debate how common or accurate his description may be, archaeological findings suggest that human sacrifice in high-status Viking burials did occur, even if infrequently. The capture of women in Viking raids. The longships came without warning, their dragon-shaped prows slicing through the morning fog as they struck the Irish coast near Dublin in 821. The annals of Ulster record that on that day, Viking raiders carried off a vast number of women into captivity, adding to the countless lives already ripped from their homes across northern and western Europe. These attacks were not chaotic outbursts of violence, but carefully planned operations. Women were especially prized as captives, not only as potential sources of ransom, but as skilled workers capable of producing the immense quantities of cloth required for sales, managing households, and helping populate the growing settlements spreading throughout Scandinavia and beyond. Genetic evidence from Iceland reveals that as many as two-thirds of the island's founding female population had Gaelic roots from Ireland or Scotland, while only about one-third of the men did. This imbalance strongly suggests that these women arrived not by choice, but through capture. The transformation from a free individual to a thrall, the Old Norse term for slave, could occur in an instant. One moment, a woman might be tending her family's fire or laboring in the fields. The next, she was seized by rough hands, an iron collar locked around her neck, bound in the hold of a ship sailing toward an unknown destiny. Some would be sold in slave markets stretching from Dublin to the Volga. Others remained as household slaves. And a few, like the young woman later described by Ibn Fadlan, were selected for purposes far more sinister. The selection before the chieftain. When the Rus chieftain died along the Volga, his followers assembled the enslaved people and posed a question heavy with finality: who among them would volunteer to follow their master into the afterlife? One woman stepped forward. Ibn Fadlan recounts that she accepted this fate, though he himself doubted whether such consent could ever be genuine. The idea of choice loses its meaning when spoken by someone who owns nothing, inherits nothing, and lives entirely at the mercy of others. Yet in the days that followed, the woman who accepted this role experienced a dramatic shift in status. She was elevated above the other enslaved people, given rich food and drink, and treated with a respect she had never known before. For 10 days, she feasted and celebrated while preparations for the funeral unfolded around her. New garments were sewn for the deceased chieftain. Vast quantities of alcohol were brewed. A ship was hauled onto land to become the vessel of death. During this time, the woman moved through the Viking camp with an authority that must have felt unreal. She was no longer simply property. She had become something else entirely, something both sacred and dreadful, a living bridge between the world of the living and the realm beyond. The binding at the funeral rite. When the day of the ceremony arrived, the ship stood ready as a floating funeral bed. The dead chieftain was removed from his temporary burial place, dressed in his finest clothing, and laid upon the vessel, surrounded by weapons, food, and mead. Then came the animal sacrifices, carried out with grim precision. A dog was split in two and placed aboard. 2 horses, 2 cows, a rooster, and a hen met the same fate, their blood consecrating the ship for what was to follow. Then followed the woman's final obligations. She was led from one tent to the next, taking part in ritual acts performed as elements of the funeral rites. Ibn Fadlan described what came afterward with almost clinical exactness, though his revulsion bled through the language. 6 men took part in the last ritual with her, each calling upon the dead chieftain and offering symbolic vows of loyalty meant to accompany him into the afterlife. This was not an expression of desire or private affection. It was ritualized theater, a public display of cosmic duty. As she passed between the tents, the Vikings struck their shields outside, the steady pounding raising a wall of sound. Whether this noise was intended to amplify the ritual's force or to drown out any resistance from within, Ibn Fadlan did not say. Through it all, the woman sang. Older accounts claim her song spoke of paradise and of seeing her dead master waiting beyond a doorframe hanging in the air. The ritual killing before the ship burning. At last, the woman was brought to the ship, where an elderly woman awaited her. The Vikings referred to this figure as the Angel of Death. With practiced authority, she directed what followed. Strong drink was forced into the enslaved woman's hands until her footing faltered, until the sharp clarity of reality softened and blurred. She was then led into a small structure built on the ship's deck and placed beside her dead master. Outside, the pounding of shields grew louder, hundreds of Vikings beating wood against metal, forming an overwhelming barrier of noise. Ibn Fadlan noted that the shields were struck to conceal any screams, to keep their sounds from deterring other enslaved people from volunteering in the future. Within that confined space, 6 men restrained the woman. The Angel of Death slipped a rope around her neck. 2 men pulled from opposite sides as the old woman used a blade to complete the ritual's final act. The account offers no gentle passing, no swift mercy. The death was violent and drawn out, carried out with a precision that suggested repetition and experience. When it ended, the woman's body was arranged beside her master, her role complete. The burning of the funeral ship. Once all sacrifices were finished, the living withdrew from the vessel. The dead chieftain's closest male relative, clothed only in the minimal garments required by the rite, walked backward toward the ship. He held a burning torch clumsily between his knees, turning his face away from the vessel as if looking upon it might invite misfortune. He drove the flame into the kindling stacked around the ship's hull. Fire quickly overtook the structure, fed by oils and resins prepared in advance. The flames rose higher, reducing wood and flesh alike to smoke and ash. This was the moment toward which everything had been moving, the dreadful climax of the ritual. In Viking belief, fire was not a force of destruction but of transformation and purification. It freed spirits from their earthly forms and carried them toward whatever realm lay beyond. For the enslaved woman, there would be no grave, no marker, no separate remembrance. In death, she would become indistinguishable from her master, her ashes mixing with his in a final, involuntary closeness. Archaeological finds from Norway indicate that this practice was not unique. Excavations have revealed graves containing decapitated individuals buried beside their masters, their bodies placed without the honor of proper rites. Whether these deaths were viewed as offerings to the gods or simply the expected end for those who served the powerful, the outcome did not change. Where power made its demands, freedom ceased, and for the enslaved within Viking society, even death was owned by someone else.